I'm Evelyn Harper, 34 years old, a biochemist who's spent a decade chasing the secrets of life in sterile labs. At my grandfather's will reading, my parents handed my sister, Claire, a check for 10 million and told me to go make my own way. The words cut deeper than I can describe. A public humiliation in a room thick with the scent of old money and betrayal. I sat there, in a mahogany, paneled office on the 50th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, the city's skyline mocking me through the glass. My family's eyes, cold, dismissive, pinned me to the leather chair. I was the afterthought, the daughter who'd chosen test tubes over trust funds. But as I stared at the carpet, willing it to swallow me whole, a single moment shifted everything. The lawyer, a stooped man with kind eyes, slid a sealed envelope across the table. My grandfather's initials, E.H., gleamed in crimson wax. The room froze. My sister's smug smile faltered. My parents' composure cracked. That envelope wasn't just paper. It was a fuse, and it was lit. I grew up in the shadow of Claire, the golden child whose every whim was celebrated while my quiet passion for science was dismissed as a quirk. My parents, James and Lillian Harper, were titans of Chicago's real estate world. Their lives a carefully curated performance of wealth and status. I was the odd note in their symphony, the girl who'd rather dissect a frog than attend a gala. My grandfather, Edward, was my refuge. He'd sit with me in his cluttered study, surrounded by books and fossils, listening to my theories about enzymes as if they were poetry. He bought me my first microscope, a heavy, gleaming thing that felt like a key to the universe. When he died 2 years ago, I was in Boston, buried in my PhD program. My mother called with funeral details, but when I arrived, exhausted and grieving, the church was empty. "We moved it up, dear," she said, her voice syrupy. No missed calls, no voicemails, just a lie so cruel it stole my chance to say goodbye. That day in the lawyer's office, the weight of those betrayals pressed against my ribs. My father's voice, sharp and final, echoed, "Go make your own way." It wasn't new. I'd heard it in 1,000 ways. At holiday dinners, where Claire's art degree was praised, while my published papers were ignored. At science fairs, where my parents arrived late, their eyes on Claire's cheerleading trophy. I was 12 when I won first place for a model of a protein structure, a fragile thing I'd built with trembling hands. My father glanced at it and said, "Cute hobby, Evelyn. Where's the food table?" Meanwhile, Claire's mediocre piano recital got a standing ovation. I learned early that my worth was invisible to them. But Edward saw me. He'd drive to my college dorm, take me to diners where the coffee was burnt and the booths sticky, and ask about my research with a focus that made me feel like I mattered. He'd nod, scribble notes, and say, "You're going to change the world, Evie." His death left a hole I couldn't fill, and my family's dismissal at the will reading was salt in the wound. As my mother stood to leave, her arm around Claire, the lawyer, Mr. Grayson, raised a hand. "One more thing," he said, his voice steady. He held up the envelope, its wax seal glinting like a warning. Edward left this for Evelyn, to be opened after the initial assets were distributed. The air shifted. Claire's eyes narrowed. My father's jaw twitched. For the first time in years, I saw fear in their faces. Not pity, not disdain, but fear. That envelope was a reckoning, and I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was a threat. The lawyer's office felt like a stage, the kind where tragedies unfold in slow motion. Mr. Grayson's fingers, steady despite his age, broke the crimson wax seal with a faint crack that echoed in the silent room. My heart pounded as he unfolded a single sheet of parchment. Its edges yellowed, but the handwriting unmistakably my grandfather's. Precise, elegant, like the man himself. Across the table, my parents, James and Lillian, sat rigid, their polished facades fraying. Claire, my sister, clutched the arm of her chair, her 10 million check, now a forgotten prop in her lap. The air was heavy, not just with anticipation, but with the weight of years. Years of being unseen, dismissed, erased. I braced myself, expecting another barb, another reminder of my place. Instead, Mr. Grayson's voice carried a quiet thunder. To my granddaughter, Dr. Evelyn Harper, I bequeath the Harper Innovation Center, its laboratories, surrounding lands, and all intellectual properties therein to be hers alone, free of encumbrance. The words hit like a shockwave. The Harper Innovation Center. A cutting-edge research facility my grandfather built on the outskirts of our family's estate in rural Illinois. Was his pride, a monument to his belief in science as a force for good. I thought he'd gifted it to a university, a lie my parents fed me years ago, casual as a weather report. Now the truth unfurled, it was mine. The room spun. Claire's gasp was sharp, almost comical. My father's face drained of color, his knuckles white against the mahogany. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Mr. Grayson wasn't done. He adjusted his glasses and continued. Additionally, all remaining liquid assets, stocks, bonds, accounts, are to be liquidated and divided equally between Evelyn and Claire. Equal. The word hung there, a blade slicing through their carefully constructed hierarchy. Claire's inheritance, once a towering monument to her favored status, was now halved. My parents' eyes darted between me and the envelope. Calculating, panicking, they'd built their lives on control. Control of money, of narratives, of me. This was chaos they hadn't scripted. I sat still, my hands trembling in my lap, not from fear, but from a dawning realization. My grandfather hadn't just left me a building or money. He'd left me power. The memory of his study flooded back, its shelves crammed with journals, the air thick with pipe smoke and possibility. I was 16, explaining my theory on protein folding, my voice shaky but eager. He'd leaned forward, eyes bright, and said, "That's it, Evie. That's the spark of something big." He believed in me when no one else did, not my parents, who saw my work as a childish diversion, nor Claire, who mocked my nerd toys. Now, in this sterile office, his belief was tangible, a lab, a legacy, a chance to prove them all wrong. But the envelope held more than legal decrees. Mr. Grayson slid a second page across the table, a handwritten note. "This is for you alone, Evelyn," he said softly. I took it, my fingers brushing the paper, feeling the weight of Edward's words, waiting to be rid. My family's stairs burned, but I didn't look up. The note was a lifeline, a whisper from the man who'd seen me when I was invisible. As I clutched it, a new fear crept in. Not of them, but of what this gift demanded. The Harper Innovation Center wasn't just a prize, it was a challenge. And I wasn't sure I was ready. The lawyer's office was a pressure cooker, the air thick with unspoken accusations as I held my grandfather's handwritten note. Its weight heavier than the paper itself. My parents' eyes. James's flinty, Lillian's calculating, bored into me. But I kept my gaze on the table, tracing the grain of the mahogany to steady my pulse. The revelation of the Harper Innovation Center had shattered their script, but I sensed they were already rewriting it. Plotting to claw back control. I excused myself, mumbling about needing air, and slipped into the hallway. The cool marble walls felt like a reprieve, but my reflection in the elevator doors, a pale, tired woman, mocked me. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah, my childhood friend, her voice a lifeline across the miles. "Evie, how'd it go?" she asked. "The dam broke." I told her everything Claire's. 10 million, my parents' dismissal, the lab that was now mine. Then, haltingly, I confessed the suspicion that had been festering for years. The one I'd buried under layers of denial. It started with the funeral. I'd flown across the country, sleepless, only to find the church empty. My mother's excuse, "We tried to call dear," was a lie, smooth and practiced. Sarah listened, her silence a safe harbor, then said, "Evie, you need to hear this." My dad always thought something was off. He saw your mom at Edward's house a few years back, burning a stack of envelopes. He swore he saw your name on them. The words hit like a punch. My letters, the ones I'd sent Edward from college, filled with my dreams and discoveries, never reached him. My parents hadn't just neglected me. They'd orchestrated a campaign to erase me from his life. A cold fury bloomed, sharp and clarifying. I remembered the calls that went unanswered, the packages I'd sent that vanished. They'd told Edward I was too busy, too aloof, painting me as the ungrateful granddaughter, while they tightened their grip on his fortune. Back in the office, I sat taller, my hands steady. Mr. Grayson handed me the note. I unfolded it alone in a quiet corner. My grandfather's words a balm and a blade. "My dearest Evie, if you're reading this, they've tried to break you. They've lied to me about you, but I see through it. Your heart, your mind. They're my true legacy. The lab is yours. Don't let them steal your light." Tears stung, but they didn't fall. He'd known. He'd suspected their deceit, and this note was his defiance, his trust in me. A memory surfaced. I was 20, sitting in his study, showing him a diagram of a gene editing technique. He'd grinned, saying, "This is why you'll outshine them all." They'd tried to dim that light, burning my letters, spreading lies to keep us apart. The truth was uglier than I'd imagined. Sarah's call to her father later confirmed it. He'd overheard my mother telling Edward I'd moved abroad, too consumed by my fancy career to visit. It was deliberate, a calculated theft of our bond. My parents hadn't just favored Claire. They'd weaponized her against me, ensuring I was written out of the story. But Edward's note, his lab, his faith, they were my armor now. I walked back into that room, my resolve like steel. They'd tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed, ready to break through. The conference room in the opposing law firm's sleek Chicago tower was a sterile battlefield, all glass and chrome, reflecting the strained faces around the table. My parents, James and Lillian, sat flanked by their lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Caldwell, whose smile was as cold as the fluorescent lights overhead. Claire, my sister, fidgeted, her usual poise replaced by a nervous twitch. I sat beside Mr. Grayson, my grandfather's lawyer, his calm presence a steady anchor. My hands rested on a worn leather journal. Edward's research notes, sent by Grayson in a package that felt like a grenade. The deposition was no grand courtroom drama, but every question from Caldwell was a calculated strike, designed to paint me as a scheming opportunist who'd manipulated a frail old man. I was ready. The truth, sharp and unyielding, was my weapon, and I wielded it with precision. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice smooth as oil. "Dr. Harper, you claim regular contact with your grandfather, yet we have no phone records. Isn't it true you were too absorbed in your career to bother with him?" I met his gaze, unflinching. My parents often said he was unavailable when I called. As for letters, I sent dozens. They never reached him. Lillian's eyes flickered with panic, quickly masked. I slid the journal across the table, its pages marked with Edward's meticulous script. "Page 32, I said, my voice clear, details a conversation we had about my research on enzyme inhibitors, dated 3 years ago. He asked for my input on a project for the lab. Page 49 notes a call about upgrading the center's spectrometers. I recommended a supplier. He trusted my expertise." Caldwell's smirk faltered as he scanned the pages, Edward's handwriting a silent witness. The room grew quieter, the air taut. I pressed on. "This journal proves we were planning to work together at the Harper Innovation Center. It wasn't an inheritance I chased. It was a partnership they stole." My father's face reddened, a vein pulsing at his temple. Claire stared at the table, her fingers twisting a ring. Then came the final blow. I produced a sworn affidavit from Tom, the groundskeeper who'd tended Edward's estate for decades. "This," I said, sliding it toward Caldwell, "is Tom's testimony. He saw my mother burning my letters, my name clear on the envelopes. He heard my father lie to Edward, saying I'd cut contact, that I didn't care. Tom's ready to testify in court." Grayson leaned in, his voice soft but lethal. A trusted community member, 30 years loyal, confirming a deliberate campaign to isolate Edward from Evelyn. How will that play to a jury? Caldwell's composure cracked. He shuffled papers, avoiding my parents' desperate glances. Lillian's hands trembled, betraying her polished mask. James looked like a man watching his empire crumble. The journal and affidavit weren't just evidence. They were a mirror, forcing them to face their own malice. A memory flashed. I was 15, showing Edward a chart of metabolic pathways, his eyes alight with pride. "You're my legacy, Evie," he'd said. They'd tried to erase that, but here, in this cold room, I reclaimed it. The fight wasn't over, but I'd drawn first blood. As I gathered my papers, my resolve hardened. They'd underestimated me for years, but I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was Edward's heir, and I'd fight for his truth with everything I had. The deposition's aftermath was a quiet earthquake, its tremors rippling through the sterile conference room as I gathered Edward's journal and Tom's affidavit. Caldwell, my parents' lawyer, closed his folder with a slow, deliberate motion, his face a mask of defeat. My father, James, stared at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so raw it felt like a physical force. Lillian's hands, usually so steady, fumbled with her purse, her composure shattered. Claire, my sister, slumped in her chair, her 10 million check now a hollow victory. Mr. Grayson, my anchor, gave me a subtle nod, his eyes glinting with pride. The truth, Edward's notes, Tom's testimony, had dismantled their lies, exposing their campaign to erase me from my grandfather's life. I'd won, not with theatrics, but with facts, sharp and undeniable. As I left the room, the weight of their glares followed, but my steps were steady, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The drive back to my small apartment in Chicago was serene, the city's lights blurring into streaks of gold. For the first time, the knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for decades began to unravel. It wasn't just the legal victory. It was the act of standing up, of speaking my truth to faces that had dismissed me since childhood. Grayson called the next morning, his voice warm with satisfaction. "They're dropping the suit, Evelyn." Caldwell advised them to retreat. Tom's testimony about the burned letters was the final nail. They're also ceasing their smear campaign. No more articles. I exhaled, the word won. Feeling strange, not triumphant, but grounding, like the calm after a storm. My parents' world crumbled swiftly. The town gossip, relayed by Sarah, painted a vivid picture. James sold his prized yacht to cover legal fees, and their country club membership was revoked for conduct unbecoming. Lillian's charity galas, once the talk of Chicago's elite, were now sparsely attended. Claire, I heard, had blown through her millions on failed ventures, her charm no match for her recklessness. Their empire, built on lies and greed, had collapsed under its own weight. I felt no glee, only a quiet sense of justice, as if the universe had finally balanced its ledger. The Harper Innovation Center was now mine to claim. I drove to the estate in rural Illinois, the familiar fields stretching under a wide sky. The lab stood sleek and modern, its glass walls catching the sunlight, a testament to Edward's vision. The brass key turned with a solid click, and I stepped inside. The air was still, smelling of dust and potential, the equipment draped in white sheets like sleeping giants. In Edward's office, I found his desk, a corkboard pinned with my old letters, ones he'd saved before my parents' sabotage. A photo of me at 10, holding a Petri dish, grinned from the wall. I ran my fingers over his chair, picturing him there, coffee in hand, dreaming of a better world. This victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. I'd reclaimed Edward's trust, his legacy from those who tried to steal it. But the fight had cost me my family, leaving scars that would never fully fade. As I stood in the lab, keys in hand, a new resolve took root. They could hate me. They could plot, but I was no longer their shadow. I was Evelyn Harper, Edward's heir, and this lab was where I'd build something that mattered. The real work was just beginning. The Harper Innovation Center stood like a quiet sentinel under the Illinois sky, its glass facade reflecting the golden hues of dawn. I pushed open the heavy door, the scent of dust and old metal greeting me like an old friend. The lab was a time capsule, its benches lined with equipment shrouded in white cloths, waiting for purpose. I wasn't just here to claim a building. I was here to resurrect my grandfather Edward's dream. His journal, tucked under my arm, held a treasure, a detailed plan for a drought-resistant wheat strain designed to save local farms from the brutal summers that threatened their survival. It was more than science. It was a mission, a way to honor the man who'd seen my worth when no one else did. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, the weight of the keys in my pocket a constant reminder of what was at stake. The first weeks were grueling. I cleaned, calibrated, and cataloged, my hands blistering from scrubbing decades of neglect. But with each machine I revived, the lab began to hum with possibility. I posted job openings on obscure academic boards, expecting little response. To my surprise, two brilliant postdocs, Lena and Amir, answered the call. Over video calls, their eyes lit up at the prospect of pure research, unbound by corporate deadlines or university politics. A lab with no strings attached. Lena said, grinning. That's a scientist's fantasy. Amir nodded, his voice eager. We could actually make a difference. I hired them on the spot, and they arrived with a hunger that matched my own. Together, we transformed the lab into a living, breathing hub, its silence replaced by the whir of centrifuges and the buzz of ideas. Our focus was Edward's wheat project. His notes outlined a gene editing approach using Cry-SPR to enhance the plant's water efficiency. We spent nights poring over his plans, tweaking protocols, and running trials. The work was meticulous, but every small breakthrough, a seedling thriving in parched soil, felt like a conversation with Edward. I could almost see him in his office, nodding approval. We partnered with 3 local farmers, including Sarah's uncle, for a pilot program. That summer, when drought scorched the county, our wheat stood tall, its golden heads defiant against the cracked earth. Word spread, and skeptical farmers who'd once believed my parents' lies began stopping by, their curiosity outweighing their doubts. One, a gruff man named Carter, shook my hand, and said, "Didn't think you had it in you, Harper." I was wrong, but my family wasn't done. A courier delivered a legal notice, its language cold and predatory. They were contesting the will, claiming Edward was senile, and I'd coerced him. It was a desperate lie, meant to drain me with endless court battles. Then came the smear campaign. A local paper ran a story quoting Lillian, her voice dripping with Fox concern. "Evelyn's brilliant, but she's always been distant. Taking the lab for her obscure experiments. It's not what Edward wanted for our community." The words stung, but Grayson's voice steadied me over the phone. "They're weak, Evelyn. Fight smart." He sent more of Edward's files, emails, notes, proof of his lucid intent. I fired back with a cease and desist letter demanding they retract their lies or face a slander suit. The lab was my battleground now, and I was building something they couldn't touch. A legacy of resilience. Not just for me, but for the land and the people Edward loved. The Harper Innovation Center glowed under the late afternoon sun, its glass walls catching the light like a beacon of hope. Inside, Lena and Amir were hunched over a microscope, their laughter mingling with the hum of machinery. The lab was alive, a far cry from the dusty relic I'd first entered months ago. Our drought-resistant wheat was thriving in test fields, and the local farmers' trust was growing, their skepticism replaced by cautious optimism. I was at the workbench, annotating data, when a battered pickup truck crunched up the gravel driveway. My heart tightened. I knew that truck. It was Claire's, though its once polished exterior was now dulled by neglect. She stepped out, her designer clothes replaced by faded jeans and a worn sweater. The sister who'd once sparkled with confidence looked hollow, her eyes carrying a weight I didn't recognize. Lena and Amir paused, sensing the shift, but I waved them back to work and walked outside, my boots steady on the porch. Claire didn't approach. She stood by her truck, hands shoved into her pockets, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Evelyn," she said, her voice rough. "I read about the wheat project. The farmers. They're talking about you like you're saving them." She looked up, and the old arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw, almost fragile. "I lost it all," she admitted, her words tumbling out. "The money, the condo, the life Mom and Dad promised. Bad deals, worse choices. I'm working at a diner now, scraping by. It's the first real thing I've done." She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to the lab's warm lights. "You're building something here, something Grandpa would have loved. I was wrong. About you. About everything." Her words stirred a storm in me. I remembered her at 16, smirking as our parents fawned over her mediocre art show while my science fair trophy sat ignored. I remembered her in the lawyer's office, clutching her 10 million check with smug certainty. The old Evelyn would have turned her away, savoring her fall. But the lab, Edward's legacy, had changed me. His note echoed in my mind. Don't act for revenge. Build for joy. I studied Claire, her calloused hands, her broken posture. She wasn't lying, not this time. Why now? I asked, my voice even. Why should I trust you? She met my eyes, unflinching. Because I've got nothing left to lose, Evie. I just want to be part of something that matters. I thought of Edward, of his belief in second chances, in the power of purpose to redeem. Forgiveness wasn't a feeling. It was a choice, one I wasn't sure I could make, but I could offer a chance. The storage room's a mess, I said finally, my tone flat. Needs organizing, heavy lifting. Start tomorrow, 7 a.m. Don't be late. Her face lit with a mix of shock and relief, a faint nod her only response. She climbed back into her truck, and as the dust settled, I stood there, the cool air sharp against my skin. I didn't know if she'd change, if we'd ever be more than strangers bound by blood. But I'd given her a door to walk through, not for her, but for the girl I'd been, who'd always wanted a sister, and for Edward, who'd believed in building bridges, not walls. The porch of the old farmhouse creaked under my weight as I sat on Edward's oak bench, its wood smoothed by years of quiet evenings. The Illinois night was vast, the stars a brilliant scatter above the fields, unmarred by city glow. Across the dark expanse, the Harper Innovation Center's lights burned softly, a testament to the work pulsing within. Lena and Amir tweaking experiments, our wheat project growing roots in the community. Down the path, a faint glow flickered in the apartment above the garage. Claire was there, settling into a new rhythm. She'd shown up every morning at 7 a.m., organizing the storage room with a focus I'd never seen in her before. Last week, I caught her helping a shy girl from our Saturday science club patiently explaining how to wire a circuit. Her hands, once manicured for Gallus, were steady, purposeful. We weren't sisters in the way storybooks promise. Too many scars for that. But we were something new, a fragile alliance built on shared work, not forced affection. I clutched Edward's letter, its words etched in my heart. Don't do it for revenge, Evie. Build for the joy of discovery. I'd spent years chasing approval from a family that couldn't see me, measuring my worth against their shallow metrics. Money, status, applause. Edward's gift wasn't the lab or the land. It was the clarity to see beyond their lies. His legacy was a belief, fierce and unyielding. That curiosity and integrity could reshape the world. The wheat project was proof fields that withstood drought. Farmers who now greeted me with respect instead of suspicion, children whose eyes lit up at the wonder of science. This was value not in dollars, but in lives touched, futures opened. A memory surfaced, me at 12, showing Edward my first microscope slide, a clumsy smear of pond water teeming with life. Look at that, Evie, he'd said, his voice warm with awe. You're holding a universe. That moment had sparked a fire, one my parents tried to smother, but Edward had tended it, coaxing it into a blaze. Now, I was the keeper of that fire, not just for myself, but for the community he loved. The lab wasn't a monument to the past. It was a bridge to the future, a place where ideas could grow as surely as our wheat. Claire's light flicked off, and the night grew quieter. I thought of my parents, now shadows in a town they once ruled, their empire of deceit reduced to a cramped condo and whispered gossip. I felt no triumph, only a distant pity. They'd chased a hollow dream, and it had consumed them. Edward's lesson was clear now: revenge burns you out, but creation endures. He'd given me the keys to the lab, but more than that, he'd given me the courage to reclaim my own life. As I looked at the stars, the same ones he'd gazed at, I understood his true inheritance, the power to choose purpose over pain, to build not from anger, but from love, for science, for community, for the girl I'd been, who'd always known she was enough. The lab's hum carried on the breeze, a reminder that this work, this life, was mine to shape, and I was finally ready to carry it forward. The Illinois night was crisp, the stars above the Harper Innovation Center, a silent choir of light. I sat on Edward's oak bench, the farmhouse behind me now a home, its rooms filled with purpose rather than echoes of betrayal. The lab's glow across the fields was a heartbeat, steady and alive, where Lena, Amir, and I built on Edward's vision. Wheat that defied drought, a community that trusted us, a future we could touch. Claire, in her quiet apartment, was finding her way, her hands now callosed from work, not greed. We weren't close, but we were no longer enemies, bound by a shared effort to create something real. Edward's letter, folded in my pocket, was my compass. Build for joy, Evie. I had, and in doing so, I'd found my own. His true legacy wasn't the lab or the money. It was the courage to see myself as enough, to choose creation over resentment. Every seedling we planted, every child's spark of wonder in our science club, carried his belief forward. My parents, now faded figures in a distant condo, had chased shadows and lost. I didn't hate them. I pitied their empty pursuit. Edward taught me that life's worth lies in what you give: knowledge, hope, a chance for others to grow. As I looked at the stars, I felt him beside me, his voice in the rustle of the oaks. I was no longer the overlooked girl scrambling for approval. I was Evelyn Harper, steward of a dream that would outlast me, just as it had outlasted him. To anyone carrying the weight of being unseen, your worth isn't in others' eyes. It's in the quiet work you do, the lives you touch, the truth you hold. Build something that matters, not for applause, but for the joy of it. That's the seed that grows forever.